Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by the MP for Dunfermline and West Fife, Douglas Chapman. Douglas, how are you today?
Yeah, pretty good actually. It's been a tough year, but I think we're nearly at the end of that. So let's look forward some optimism for 2021.
Aye, fingers crossed. Well, we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 1,326,343 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 1,210,787 were confirmed negative, 115,556 were positive. There were 1,190 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, 47 new reported deaths. Of course, this will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will show symptoms and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. As always, we urge you, if you are showing symptoms of a fever, a new, dry, persistent cough, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then please do book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 1,025 people in hospital last night, 56 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 4,373. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures published today show that 69,051 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 744 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And before we go any further, if you would like to join the conversation here, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland@7. And as you can see there, we will be flashing up your tweets throughout the show, so do please get in touch. Our first story tonight, the SNP has renewed calls for an emergency extension to the transition period, as health leaders in England warn that the NHS will face disruption even if a deal is reached. In a letter to the Prime Minister, the NHS Confederation has called on Boris Johnson to extend the transition period by a month to take the NHS out of the immediate danger zone, and it will enable the NHS to continue to focus on fighting the pandemic without having to contend with disruptive changes brought about by a no-deal outcome. Commenting, SNP Shadow Health spokesperson Dr. Philippa Whitford MP said, "Boris Johnson's plans for an extreme low-deal or no-deal Brexit pose a very real danger to the NHS and the health of people across the UK. With the UK facing a worsening COVID-19 pandemic, soaring unemployment, and over 1,000 lorries piled up at the border, it is crucial that the Tories ditch their reckless plans and agree an emergency extension to the transition period to protect the NHS and the economy." So, Douglas, this has been a refrain throughout this year that adding the disruption of Brexit on top of the COVID pandemic was going to cause chaos. And now, with less than 10 days to go, it does seem like there is going to be substantial disruption one way or another, at the same time as hospital admissions due to COVID are at a record high in England. What do you make of the UK government's strategy, if we can call it that?
Well, what we have is absolutely the perfect storm in terms of the double virus that we have, the virus of COVID and the virus that I would describe Brexit as being as well. And as Scots, we need to find a path through this, because what's happening is totally unacceptable to a nation of the UK that voted not to have any part of Brexit. So, I know this has been a line that the SNP have taken right from a period 4.5 years ago, and we've never had any sensible answers to any of that, because every argument we've put forward, any reasonable demand that we put on the table has been rejected by the UK government. And only this week I was hearing that through a third party, that the recent Cobra meeting, I think people on the Scottish Government side were just shocked at the level of complacency and arrogance that we've been getting from the UK side. Now, that should come as no surprise to anyone. But I think even at this stage, 4.5 years from the point of the UK voting for Brexit, we're still awaiting a final decision on what that deal might look like. And for everyone out there, it's affecting people's lives, their livelihood, their businesses, you name it. It's just put a level of uncertainty over the end of this year that could have been avoided had the UK been a bit more adept at signing up to a deal and making sure that at least some part of the economy, some part of our society has a level of security attached to it.
Mm-hmm. We will, of course, come to that the question of a Brexit deal in a minute. But when it comes to the reaction to this call for some kind of extension, some kind of break, it's coming from the NHS as well as the SNP. But the Labour Party seems unwilling to support that same call. What do you think is stopping Keir Starmer from doing what seems like just a common sense move at this stage?
Yeah, well, I think that Labour are really stuck in quite a difficult electoral bind actually, because they lost a lot of the so-called red wall seats at the last election in this time last year, 2019, and I think if they've got to have any chance of winning these seats back, then a lot of the people in these areas actually voted for Brexit and voted for Brexit in big numbers. And that's the reason I think that Labour have lost that level of support in these areas, because they're not seen as either a pro-Brexit party or not pro-Brexit enough. And I think their gut feeling is that UK should remain within Europe, but I think they're caught between the two stools. That if they're seen to be supporting Brexit, then they lose a lot of the sort of middle class Labour supporting community, and if they're seen to be going against it, then they'll lose a lot of the seats and support in the north of England. I think that's where Starmer is, and it's a problem he's got, and quite interesting he decided to talk about devolution this week, which hopefully we'll come on to later as well. I think in both instances, the Labour Party seems to be a party going nowhere fast. So we'll just wait and see what happens with that in the future.
Mm. Well, speaking of Brexit, we move on now, and agreement on a post-Brexit trade deal appears to be likely to be announced within hours, after months of tortuous negotiations. A meeting of EU ambassadors has been penciled in for Christmas Eve to start the ratification process. Sources in Brussels and London confirmed that they believe the talks were coming to a successful conclusion. Diplomats representing the EU member states are already combing through some of the 2,000 pages of legal text that have been agreed. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is understood to have been in constant contact with Boris Johnson in the last 72 hours, as she has sought to strike a compromise satisfactory to both Downing Street and the EU member states. Given the many twists and turns in the negotiations up to now, the possibility of a last-minute hitch remains, but a final call is believed to be scheduled for this evening. One EU source said the stars have aligned. Negotiations are understood to be continuing, with the telephone call by Johnson and the Commission President likely to be the moment that a deal is announced, if the final issues are smoothly resolved. Downing Street and the European Commission have both kept silent about it all day. So, Douglas, do you feel like there is a deal within touching distance now? Do you think we are going to hear something this evening?
Well, I think the answer to that is who knows. Yeah, I think we've had promises of deals since almost the point that I joined Parliament 5 years ago, it was going to be the easiest thing possible to do a deal with the EU. The UK would have their cake and they would eat it. All these things have been part of the discussion that we've had over the last 4.5 years since the Brexit vote. I certainly hope that there will be some deal, but at this late stage, you just wonder how good that deal is going to be. If they're down to discussing the fine print on one or two aspects of the deal, then I suspect that the deal itself may be that it's not really in the UK's interests, and I think the EU may well have the upper hand in these final stages of the deal making process. But whatever the outcome is, there's no deal that would actually benefit Scotland to any great extent. The best deal we could have had was remaining within the EU as members, even within the context of being a member of the United Kingdom. But we need to really look at a different path now. There's no going back, and irrespective of what deal is cobbled together at the last minute, the only real prospect of a successful Scotland in the future, and one that can take part with our European neighbours and friends and trade in one of the biggest markets in the world without really having too much thought about it, is to get back into the EU as quickly as possible after we've become an independent nation. And I think that there's certainly, we've made a lot of friends in the last few years regarding the EU, and I think the EU is absolutely crystal clear in terms of Scotland's position in all of this. And we've just been bystanders, if you like, despite our best efforts. But we've not been able to take part in negotiations. We've not been able to, or allowed to take part in some of the discussions, and it just puts us totally on the back foot. But when it comes to independence, I think it'll put us on the front foot. And I think a swift accession to the EU might be the order of the day once we become an independent nation.
And Douglas, the Parliament will have to be recalled to ratify this. So I'm wondering, with 2,000 pages of legal text to scour, how fast a reader are you?
Yeah, well, so speed reading is a talent that MPs develop fairly quickly. But I think the main thing is with if there's any recall to Parliament, and I certainly think there should be. We're going to be probably discussing maybe not down to the finer points of the deal, but I think the broad concepts of what the deal is about. And for that to take place, we need to go a step further than the Parliament that we have at the moment, where MPs in Scotland can do quite a few things, but they can't vote in their own right, and they can't take part in debates at the moment. Just because of the COVID situation, it's very, very difficult to travel up and down to London. And I think, like many MPs, I'm not prepared to put my community and my family at risk in these circumstances, especially since some of our MPs as well have got members of their family who are still shielding and so on. But there needs to be a way of having a debate around this, and Parliament being recalled sometime this side of the new year to make sure that we can at least attempt to go through the number of pages that you're talking about and make sure that again, Scotland's voice is put forward, and put forward strongly in the House of Commons. But that's, again, I'm sure there's discussions going on at the top level at the moment on how that would work. But I'm absolutely convinced that we can't possibly ratify any sort of deal on the basis that only maybe a third or 2/3 of the parliamentarians can take part in that.
Yeah,
take part in that debate.
Yeah, well, if there is any announcement before 8 o'clock, then we will bring it to you. If not, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until tomorrow. But we move on now, and Matt Hancock announced today that AstraZeneca had submitted a full data package about its COVID-19 vaccine to the medicines regulator, the next step in its journey to approval for use. I'm delighted to be able to tell you that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine developed here in the UK has submitted its full data package to the MHRA for approval, Hancock has said. This is the next step towards a decision on the deployment of the vaccine, which is already being manufactured, including here in the UK. Now, this AstraZeneca vaccine, it's had a slightly more difficult process towards being approved than the Pfizer vaccine that's already out there. But it is going to be a lot easier to use because can be stored at normal fridge temperatures rather than at the sort of deep freeze of the Pfizer vaccine. Are you hopeful about this being approved quickly and getting out there?
Well, I think you mentioned earlier in the program that your Dr. Philippa Whitford on I think in the last few
Mm-hmm.
days, and or certainly you've quoted her tonight, and I think probably Philippa's in much better position to answer that question than I am. But what's absolutely certain is that we need a thorough and deliverable way of making sure that the majority of the population can get access to the vaccine as quickly as possible. And obviously, we need to make sure that each stage of the testing and regulatory regimes that vaccines need to go through is done to the very high standard. Because we can't actually create a more difficult problem than we have at the moment. So I think the government, and what I've heard from Scottish government as well, they're prioritising care homes and older
Mm-hmm.
people and so on, and on a sliding scale. Um, and I think that's the right way forward. I've been looking at the vaccine issue on a peripheral basis, and again on the basis that there's people both in Parliament and elsewhere who are much more skilled in looking at that information and making sure that we get the right advice to take
Yeah.
things forward. But I think pace and scaling up is the key to this. And if we can get a vaccine that actually does the job we need it to do, then it's how do we actually deliver that as quickly as possible, and using every resource we can to make people as safe as possible as early as possible in the process.
Mhm. Well, we move now to Kent. And truck drivers trapped along hundreds of miles of road near the port of Dover are facing a riddle. To travel to France, they must have a COVID-19 test, but they say there are no tests to be had. After turning parts of Kent into a vast truck park by closing the border to incoming freight, France opened its border today to truckers who have a negative COVID test that is less than 72 hours old. On the ground at the port of Dover, for centuries one of the main arteries for trade with the rest of Europe, there was little sign of any tests or much other support for stranded drivers. The UK government said it would hand out tests to some of the 8 to 10,000 truckers stranded in the area and that it would take time to roll out. A testing unit was supposed to be on its way to the port, according to local officials. Truck drivers scuffled with police and sounded their horns in protest this morning around Dover. Many have been eating through their last provisions on the side of the road, while families gather for Christmas thousands of miles away. I mean, you have to feel sorry for these truckers. They had no way of expecting this, no way of preparing for it. Now they're being told they have to have a test, but how are they even going to get to a testing site given that they're stuck in their trucks in a massive traffic jam? What's your feeling about how the UK government has handled this crisis?
Well, again, it comes back to some of my original comments. I think about the level of complacency and arrogance that we sit through at Westminster and have done so for the last 5 years, and it comes as no surprise that very little in the way of planning has been done around this area. I mean, you must feel heart sorry for people who are stuck in their lorry. No prospect of delivering their goods to the market they should be heading for. And I think there's just a huge personal or a lack of planning to actually allow people to do things like get food, go to the toilet, all these things, all the normal things that we would take for granted, just seem to be completely ignored. It's been about piling as many trucks as we can onto an aircraft runway somewhere in Kent or southeast England, and just hope for the best. I remember not so long ago, a former transport minister in Scotland. I think we faced a dreadful storm which came out of the blue, and cars and lorries were stuck on the M8, and that minister actually resigned. I think it was Stuart Stevenson at the time. And we've had four and a half years, or the British government had 4.5 years to plan for this time. And while the problem has been added to by the fact we've had COVID, and maybe that's the core reason for this particular problem, but we've got Brexit on the back of this as well, and it's not as if these issues have come right out of the blue. I mean, it's just not been a storm as we had in a few years ago. It's been 4 years in the making. So why on earth are we still sitting here with a transport minister who is still in his job? Why are we sitting here with these Brexit teams and the people who are leading these? They're still in a job. So I think these are serious questions that need to be asked. But I think it comes back to a very core principle of this current UK government, and that is they just don't care. I can't see anything in what they're doing that tells me that this is a caring government. I mean, I think if this had happened in Scotland, we'd be trying to get food to these truck drivers. If this happened in Scotland, I think the Scottish government would be doing their level best to make sure that they had toilet facilities, that their welfare was taken care of, that their businesses were, the headquarter businesses were aware of what was happening, and the lines of communication would be much more professionally done. But it's when you look at everything that goes near Whitehall, it just seems to be gunged up in a Whitehall system, and there's not really an awful lot of room for putting caring about individuals and what the requirements are into the mix. It's all about the job needs to be done, and it's all Churchill spirit, and or Dunkirk spirit, and what would Churchill do in these circumstances? Which is it's an attitude that comes from decades ago, and what we need to be thinking about is what's our attitude for the future. And I think the whole mood is changing at the moment. That people really do think about what's in it, how is the rest of their life going to look like after COVID and after Brexit. And I think a lot of people are reassessing how we treat each other and how we care for each other in the future. And I think that's probably a much more humane kind of society that we could aim for. But at the moment, I don't think the UK government care very much about what happens. They just rumble on as if everything's okay, and it's people's lives and their livelihoods, as we said before, that is at the core. And I don't think they really care too much about that.
Yeah. We did, of course, have Elaine White from the Clyde Fishermen's Association on the show last night, talking about the existential threat to some of her members if the produce that they're trying to ship is lost. Fergus Ewing, I've just been handed this. Fergus Ewing has written to the UK government asking for compensation for businesses that have been in this situation, especially the fresh seafood. Can those trucks be prioritised? So we'll see, obviously, what the response is to that letter. But that's Fergus Ewing making that letter to George Eustace. just today. We move on just now, though, to the other side of the Atlantic, and Donald Trump has pardoned 4 security guards from the private military firm Blackwater, who were serving jail sentences for killing 14 civilians, including 2 children, in Baghdad in 2007, a massacre that sparked an international outcry over the use of mercenaries in war. The 4 guards, Paul Slough, Evan Liberty, Dustin Herd, and Nicholas Slatton, were part of an armoured convoy that opened fire indiscriminately with machine guns, grenade launchers, and a sniper on a crowd of unarmed people in a square in the Iraqi capital. The Nisour Square massacre was one of the lowest episodes of the US-led invasion and occupation of Iraq. Slough, Liberty, and Herd were convicted on multiple charges of voluntary and attempted manslaughter in 2014, while Slatton, who was the first to start shooting, was convicted of first-degree murder. Slatton was sentenced to life and the others to 30 years in prison each. The pardons are one of several the US President has granted to American service personnel and contractors accused or convicted of crimes against non-combatants and civilians in war zones. In November last year, he pardoned a former US Army commando who was set to stand trial over the killing of a suspected Afghan bomb maker, and a former Army lieutenant convicted of murder for ordering his men to fire at 3 Afghans. So, Douglas, what do you make of this decision by Donald Trump on his way out of office?
Well, that's. I just hope that your statement there is absolutely true. I hope he is on his way out of office. And again, we've been talking about the last 4.5 years and so on. I think Trump overall has not been a force for positivity or a force for good, and we can't do anything on this side of the Atlantic to speed up his removal from the White House. But I think that I think everybody on this side of the or most of the people I speak to on this side of the Atlantic would want that period to be as short as humanly possible, and let's hope the next week or few weeks after that into 2021 go as quickly as possible in our own minds, and allow a new president to be inaugurated, and bring his own plans to what is really a fantastic country. It's America's sort of has enormous influence, sometimes for bad, but mostly for good. And I think we need to get back to a level where America actually respects the rule of law, where America expects the higher standards in diplomacy, and I think that's where we should be trying to encourage President Biden to go to, and I think that's probably in his DNA as well. I think we've had some very positive signs from Biden over things like climate change, and of course Glasgow hosts the COP26 conference next November, and I hope by that time you'll have a really clear view of where the Biden presidency hopes to take things. And I think if it can only be in a positive direction after Trump, but we need to find out what the detail is of that. And as a member of the excuse me, as a member of the British American Parliamentary Group at Westminster, I think we're looking forward to some significant changes just in the way that we can discuss things transatlantically, and make sure that America lives up to its promises and its commitments, especially in terms of like the Paris Climate Agreement, which Biden has already said that he would live up to, so and re-sign. So these are all positive steps, and quite honestly, in the dying days of a Trump administration, just going back to your original question, I don't think anything would surprise us in terms of the pardons that are given to people and so on that have carried out some heinous activities. But I think we're just all looking forward to getting through to middle of January and seeing President Biden and his team take America in a different direction
Yeah.
from that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, it is worth noting, by the way, that it was as vice president, it was Joe Biden who pursued the original prosecution of those four
Yeah.
contractors. But we come back to Scotland now, and the SNP has called on the Chancellor to U-turn on Tory cuts to the free TV licence for over 75s and increase the uptake of pension credit ahead of the next financial year, as new analysis suggests that Scottish pensioners have been hit with a £40 million bill in 2020. Research from the House of Commons Library has revealed the overall cost to pensioners from the Tory cuts to funding could be as much as £498 million across the UK and £40 million to pensioners in Scotland each year, based on the cost of the TV licence in 2020-21. According to the analysis, the latest figures show there are approximately 251,000 people over the age of 75 in Scotland impacted by the cuts that are not claiming pension credit, while the cost of a standard TV licence is £157.50. So, Douglas, this has been something that has been kind of rumbling on for a while. There seemed to be a determination by the Tories to take this away and to slowly kind of strangle the BBC of funding. What do you make of this research that's come out today?
Yeah, well, the pension on the pension credit side, it's a campaign that we've been running for some time in conjunction with Age Concern, and I know that one of my colleagues, Anne McLaughlin, MP, has written a letter as well this week, and has garnered quite a few signatures on that letter to actually have the government relook at the pension credit and make sure that people who can apply are encouraged to do so. And I think there's a lot of information out there, and a bit a campaign building up some steam behind the unfairness of how things are run at the moment. Again, I think it's in terms of pensions in general. I mean, we've been fighting the case for a number of years as well over women's pensions, and working with the WASPI groups actually to bring in a fairer pension system. We've got minister after minister who has been appointed to that role, has rejected all these calls, and again, it maybe just resonates a little bit in what I was saying earlier about we have a government that doesn't really care, and whether that's really about pensioners or whether it's on people who are in receipt of benefits. We feel constantly that we're knocking our head against a brick wall here, because there's a certain group of people that the British government are prepared to support, and it tends to be, as we've seen lately, some of their old pals, their schoolmates, their cronies. But when it comes to actually paying money to people who actually need it, imagine a situation where we need a professional footballer to run a campaign to actually tell the government they need to be providing school meals during holiday periods and give support to families most in need during a health crisis. That's the level that it's got to, that these campaigns need to be run, and need to be run constantly, to actually make sure that the government are aware of some of the difficulties and that people face and their families face. And you just feel heart sorry for a lot of people in these circumstances, because either they're really under pressure in terms of making sure that they can pay their rent or pay their heating bills and so on, and to have that compounded by the fact we're in a time where more and more people are having to stay in the house and heat their homes, and maybe what's going to be a fairly cold winter. I think we're expecting snow in the next few days. So, it's that kind of winter that really doesn't doesn't make it any easier for pensioners who should be receiving the full amount of pension credit, but have not had the encouragement actually to apply, or when they do apply, then it's made much more difficult for them to actually get the money that they deserve.
Yeah. Well, we come to a wee bit of good news now. Health and social care staff who are eligible for the £500 thank you payment will begin to receive it in the new year. Announced by the First Minister at the end of November, health workers will begin receiving their payment from February of 2021, and payments to social care staff will start in March. Payments will be made to health and social care staff through their normal payroll system. The relevant pay circular has been issued to NHS boards. For social care, a new payment mechanism is required. The Scottish Government is working urgently with social care partners to set this up. Employers will be asked to offer the payment in instalments over 3 months to minimise any impact on universal credit awards. Employers will be asked to make this offer to ensure staff receive the full benefit of the payment, as the ability to exempt these payments from benefit calculations is not within the current powers of the Scottish Government and sit with the UK Department for Work and Pensions. So, Douglas, I don't think there's any argument to be had about whether healthcare workers deserve some sort of reward for their efforts this year. But the point about the DWP is worth looking at, isn't it? Why do you think the UK government is unwilling to kind of allow any exemption for this money?
Well, it may just be that it wasn't their idea, and I think sometimes the relationship between the two governments is made more difficult by that kind of attitude. But I think we all value care workers and our hospital staff, and so everybody across the public sector who have worked exceptionally hard, from councils and our police force and so on. And I think all the Scottish Government were trying to do was to actually recognise some of that. It's in the great scheme of things, £500 probably isn't a huge amount of cash, especially once it's taxed and so on. But I think it's just a marker to say, thanks very much for everything you've been doing. It's just a point of recognition of the hard work that's been put in, and I think there's I think a lot of people who currently work in hospitals are still do a fantastic job. We've got some relatives who are involved in the care sector, and I think they've been put in very stressful situations over the last 9 or 10 months, and I think any little bit of recognition is just that. It's just a thank you. And I think everybody probably listening to this show would support that wholeheartedly. But I think it speaks about the relationship between Scotland and the UK government just now as well, though. And again, it's while the Scottish Government are trying to do the right thing, it wouldn't have taken very much from the UK government just to give a bit of support to that, and change the tax ruling just on that, just for a one-off payment. But it's not to be, so there we are.
Well, we stay with the Health Service, and Health Secretary Jean Freeman has welcomed the appointment of 3 new health and social care leaders in the Scottish Government. Caroline Lamb has been appointed Chief Executive of NHS Scotland and the Scottish Government Director General for Health and Social Care. Ms Lamb joined the Scottish Government in 2019, and since March of 2020 she has supported the response to the coronavirus pandemic by overseeing Test and Protect and the vaccination programme. Ms Lamb is expected to take up her post in January of next year. Dr Gregor Smith has been appointed Chief Medical Officer. A former GP and Medical Director for Primary Care in NHS Lanarkshire, Dr Smith joined the Scottish Government in 2012 and was appointed Interim CMO in April of 2020. Dr. Smith takes up his post with immediate effect. And Professor Amanda Croft has been appointed Chief Nursing Officer. A former chief executive of NHS Grampians, she brings over 30 years of experience across acute and primary healthcare services to the role. She is expected to start work in February 2021, working alongside current Chief Nursing Officer Professor Fiona McQueen, who retires in March. I think maybe the most interesting one of these is Gregor Smith, who obviously has been acting Chief Medical Officer for most of the pandemic after the unfortunate incident with Caroline Calderwood. These have all got to be welcomed, don't they?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat that last bit?
I was just saying that it's good news, certainly for Gregor Smith to finally have that post confirmed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as ordinary citizens, we watch the performance of our health professionals and the First Minister, and indeed the police officers as well, who appear every day on our TV screens. And certainly Gregor's been one of those who I think has performed exceptionally well in that role, albeit that it's been a temporary position, as it were. So yeah, it's good to see that decision being made, and I think we can, with that team in place. I think it sounds like we can move forward with a huge amount of confidence in the future of the NHS Scotland, and all the hard work as well that goes on between the local authorities and NHS boards and so on, actually bring the elements of the care packages together, because it's not just about what happens in hospitals, it's also about that level of community support, to keep people at home for as long as they possibly can and be well cared for in these circumstances. So I think there's wide experience across that whole group, and I'm very hopeful that the NHS in Scotland will continue to perform at a very high level based on the team that's been pulled together,
Yeah.
and that includes obviously Gregor today as well. So that's good news.
Yeah, we do wish them all the best. It can't be an easy time to be working in the NHS, particularly not with that kind of responsibility. So we do certainly congratulate them and hope for the best. We move on now, though, and new legislation to make sure that next year's Scottish parliamentary election can take place fairly and safely during the coronavirus pandemic has been backed by MSPs. The vote is expected to go ahead as planned on the 6th of May, and the Scottish General Election Coronavirus Bill, which has passed its final stage in the Scottish Parliament, will provide powers, if needed, to conduct the election differently. The legislation, developed in partnership with the Electoral Management Board, the Electoral Commission, the Scottish Parliament and the political parties, introduces key measures including earlier deadlines for postal vote applications and power for ministers to allow polling to take place over more than one day if needed, to support physical distancing at polling stations, following a recommendation by the convener of the Electoral Management Board. So it's good to see that democracy can still work even in the middle of a pandemic. But interestingly, we saw Labour and the Lib Dems recently talking about delaying the election. What did you make of that, coming from those two parties who you would think would be desperate to try and get the SNP out of office?
Yeah, well, you would think, but then I think you just need to take a sideways glance at the opinion polls, and it actually doesn't look exceptionally positive for some of these parties at the moment. But I think the main point here is that despite everything that we're having to live through at the moment, that democracy and the wheels of government need to carry on as before. I think somebody put the question the other day of how many other elections are expected between now and next May, and I think there's certainly just in Europe alone, I think there's two presidential elections due in early January and February, followed by I think it's maybe 3 or 4 parliamentary elections in various countries across the EU. So I wasn't picking up from any of these reports that the other countries involved were putting their elections on hold, and they were pushing ahead, just as America pushed ahead with their election. Maybe one of one of the largest countries on the planet, and they managed to have a successful presidential election just in the last month or so. So I think Scotland is in a position to do that. I think we've got a very mature electoral system in Scotland. The Scottish Parliament's over 20 years old now. People are used to the voting system. They're used to the how they vote either regionally or for constituencies. I think it's more the organisation and changes to the organisation that we might have to look at regarding, for example, you mentioned about postal votes. I think postal votes probably going to be much more important this time, but they need to be able to be returned safely within a time frame, and to make sure that every postal vote is returned, for example. Then I can see the logic of making sure that postal votes are returned maybe a bit earlier than we'd normally expect them to be, just so that we know that they'll be brought in good time, and actually been able to be recognised as a valid vote in the Scottish Parliament election. So unlike some of the other parties, I think, and despite COVID, I think the SNP are actually looking forward to the election in May. And if the polls remain anything like the same between now and May, then we are looking at an SNP government being returned. And from my perspective, that also means moving on to independence as quickly as we possibly can beyond that. And I think that's a day that we're all, certainly on our side of the fence, a day that we're all looking forward to immensely. And I think our messages bring it on.
Well, speaking of seats of power, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has announced that the Stone of Destiny is to be relocated to Perth. The announcement to the Scottish Parliament was made on behalf of the Commissioners for the Safeguarding of the Regalia, who advised the Queen about all matters relating to the stone. In 2019, Perth and Kinross Council and Culture Perth and Kinross made a submission to the Commissioners to relocate the stone to Perth. Following a public consultation, the Commissioners recommended to the Queen that the stone should be relocated, and Her Majesty has now accepted that advice. The stone is planned to be moved in 2024 to become the centrepiece of the opening of the Perth City Hall refurbishment project. Plans will be in place to ensure the stone can be returned to Westminster Abbey for future coronations. Historic Environment Scotland, who have been responsible for the stewardship and care of the stone since its return to Scotland in 1996, will continue to assist with the ongoing conservation of the stone. So, Douglas, what do you make of this?
Well, I think it's certainly got John Swinney very excited, and Pete Wishart as well, as the two local MSPs and MP respectively. And I think they're absolutely delighted about the Stone of Destiny being returned to Perthshire. So I think that's a thoroughly good thing for them. I'd just like to say that from a Dunfermline and West Fife perspective, I'd love the Rosyth to Zeebrugge ferry to be reinstated, and just look forward to something, as opposed to maybe looking back to our historical links with the past. And I'd also like to think that maybe one day we can re-establish the old alliance, which was signed in Dunfermline, and I think it was around about 1296. I'm not that old myself, I can't remember it, but I think 1296 seems to stand out in my mind, when we had a direct link with the people of France, or between the people of France and the people of Scotland, in terms of trading agreements and other agreements that we have. Maybe the original EU was based on based on that link of the old alliance, but just in terms of looking forward as well, I think it's a great thing for Perth, and good luck to them. And I think the City Hall project has been quite controversial over the last wee while, but it sounds like something positive is going to come from that, and we might be in a position where most of our tourist industry has returned to normal by the time that the Zone of Destiny is installed in Perth, and I think at that point it'll be quite an attraction for people to come and visit, and giving them another good reason to go and visit Perth. But they can
Absolutely.
also come and visit Dunfermline anytime they like.
Well, Douglas, you did bring up the campaign that you've been kind of running single-handedly for a while to get the Rosyth to Zeebrugge ferries back up and running. And obviously this week with what we've seen at Dover, it does show how risky it is to have such a pinch point where vast amounts of freight is going all from one place to one place. So what's been what have people been saying to you about that campaign? I think we talked about it on the show a few months ago. Have you had any more discussions since then, and particularly this week? Has anybody been saying, Douglas, you were right all along?
Well, I've had a huge amount of email this week from people all over Scotland, not just my own constituents. But and I want to thank people for doing that. I think it's important that we keep up this level of pressure, because it just seems like a complete no-brainer to me that Scotland, as we'll just be talking about, the old alliance going back to 1295 or 1296. We are a trading nation. It's in our DNA, and it seems ridiculous that we need to send most of our finished goods, or even goods that are part of the supply chain, via Dover or via some other south coast port in order to reach our main markets in Europe. And it's time that we had that direct link back into Europe, and whether that's Rosyth to Zeebrugge, Rosyth to Denmark, or maybe a route into northern Germany or Hamburg, somewhere like that, then that's the direction of travel that we should be taking things in, if you forgive that particular pun. The discussions I've had within the last few months, but there is an interested operator. But I've said that before. And I think they've been having discussions with Four Ports, for example, to make sure that berthing space would be available for a ship that they want to use. Quite honestly, the person and agency I'm speaking through are doing quite a considerable amount of work in terms of setting up the Irish links, and I know that the one individual in particular keeps saying, every day I'm working on setting up links between Ireland, Republic of Ireland, and Europe, and I'm Scottish, and for the life of me, I can't understand why we're not setting up these direct links from the likes of Rosyth into the heart of Europe. And it's going to happen. It's just, for me, it's just time, and I feel a wee bit like Bruce and the Spider, as I've said before, that this is about determination and seeing this through, because there is no doubt that if we've learned nothing, I think, over the last few days, that the lesson is there for all to see, that we should be making things in Scotland that people want to buy in Europe, and whether that's our fantastic produce, or whether it's actually finished goods, doesn't really matter. But we have a huge market in Europe, and we need to have the infrastructure in place that allows us to get to these markets as quickly and as easily as we possibly can. And quite honestly, our experience over the last few days suggests to me that should not be necessarily through the South Coast ports and the Port of Dover. We should be setting up our own systems, our own infrastructure, to make sure that we can get our goods safely to market, and have a reliable system and supply chain that allows that to happen. So that's the campaign in a nutshell. But we need to keep pressing as many people as possible. I've emailed one minister today and spoken to another one on the phone, which were both very positive, and from the Scottish Government. And so hopefully we can keep pressing and making sure that there will be a day when when our ferry sails up and down the Forth on a daily basis, and either taking goods or people back and forward to our friends in Europe. And that's the way forward for Scotland. We need to be able to sell our goods and have them into market as quickly as possible, and have the supply chains behind that on both sides of the continent, to make sure that we have a successful and vibrant economy in the future.
Well, Douglas, I'm sure many of our viewers will absolutely support your campaign. We do very much, as you say, from the last few days, we've seen that it's something we absolutely need. But unfortunately, we have just about run out of time. So I would like to thank you, Douglas, very much for joining us this evening. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in making these shows if we didn't have you. So thank you very much for spending an hour with us this evening. We'd always have to ask if you are able to support Broadcasting Scotland. If you do, please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month is what helps us to produce these programmes and just keep going. It's an expensive business to keep making TV shows every night, and we do need your financial support if you can give it. So do please support us if you can. We have talked a wee bit about our crowdfunder. We are trying to raise enough money to employ some staff here. We want a full-time editor and the equivalent of 3 full-time journalists. But we can only do that, again, with your support. So if you would like to just make a one-off donation to that, you can also go to broadcastingscotland.scot/donate. If you're not able to support us financially, we absolutely understand. The shows will always be free to view online, so you don't have to worry that we're going to shut you out. But you can still make a big difference for us by following us on social media. You can find us on Twitter @BroadcastScot. You can also like our Facebook page, subscribe to our YouTube channel, find us on the Amazon Fire Stick, and then please share the shows around with your friends, your family, anyone else who you think might like to see what happens here at Broadcasting Scotland. We are trying our best to build a better broadcaster for Scotland, and we can only do that with your support in terms of spreading the word. So do please do that for us if you can. And finally, the other thing that we need as well as paid staff is some more volunteers, especially coming up to that election next year that we've been discussing. We want to be able to have people at every count across the country, and that is going to take volunteers. We probably can't afford to pay everybody. So if you're interested in getting involved in that or any other aspect of producing news programmes for Scotland, in Scotland, then please do get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. That is all we've got time for tonight. Tomorrow, of course, is Christmas Eve, so we won't have a regular news show. We will, though, have a special look back at the year with myself and my colleague Gordon Ross. So that's all we've got time for tonight. Thanks again to Douglas Chapman. Thanks again to you for joining us, and have a great evening. Good night.
The Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.